Welcome to Tech in Real Estate. I'm thrilled to have Alex Fuentes, EVP of Strategic Growth at Brickeye and founder of Streets Ahead Consulting, joining us. Alex has over 20 years of experience in startups and rapid change environments, excelling at scaling businesses and developing partnerships across North America. At Brickeye, Alex is at the forefront of construction technology, using IoT and real-time data to help developers and contractors mitigate risks and improve profit margins. In this episode, we'll explore how innovation is transforming the construction industry and what it means for the future of real estate. Let's get started. Hey, Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ariel. Thanks. Appreciate it. Great to be on.
Yeah, we have a lot to discuss, including how you made an impact in the insurance industry, which is a huge topic for a lot of investors. But before we do, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background, maybe what you were doing before real estate, and how did you end up creating your own company?
Oh, geez. Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a non-traditional path, but got into technology, I guess, early on, always been fascinated by when you're a young kid or when you're, in your teens and you're looking to say, what am I going to study? I always thought technology was cool. So, got into engineering, I did a degree in mechanical engineering and then, worked in a number of different industries and then kind of got more exposed to the business side of things and, kind of how business works, how does it grow, strategy, that kind of thing. And I kind of realized quickly beyond these engineering skills, maybe I need to learn a little bit more about that. So I went back and I did an MBA for a couple of years. And there kind of get me a bit of a bigger picture. And so my thinking evolved a bit. It's like not just technology, but how can we use technology to kind of have an impact and solve big problems? So that got me thinking. I spent about 15 years in clean tech because I thought about like, what are the big problems that are happening? Climate is a big problem. And when you think about managing problems, you think about a lot of times it's around how do you manage risk? So I was thinking about climate risk, what kind of interesting technology is going on there. So I got into like at the time, I'm dating myself now, but I got back into the bleeding edge of renewable energy, solar and wind, and then moved on into energy storage and how technology impacts that. And then as things kind of evolved, was introduced to Internet of Things technology or IoT, and another big risk, which is around kind of managing, construction risk, which is I found kind of a fascinating industry. It's still in many ways, there's been a lot of progression and advancement in the industry, but in a lot of ways as well, it's still very traditional, kind of do things the way they've always been done. And I thought, that's an industry that's kind of ripe for disruption and what can technology do there? And so I got involved in that side, both through IoT and into what I would call construction tech, and then also insurtech. And you kind of alluded to insurance. So bit of an interesting path in terms of how I got here. If I would say that this is what I could have told you 20 years ago, this is what I'd be doing. I had no idea, but it's been really interesting journey along the way.
Yeah, I could see that. Really amazing experience. And you seem like the individual who loves taking on new challenges. I mean, IoT, like you said, construction risk, and we're talking about insurance shortly. These are all such relevant issues, climate risks as well, that are difficult to tackle. Have you ever had like apprehensions about going to these fields, or always excited?
You know what? That's a good question. I mean, I've always been intrigued by things that I want to learn more about, right? And that I haven't had exposure to. So I've kind of almost, whether it's like a masochistic thing or something, I've always kind of put myself into like, what's the next thing you should learn about and kind of just trying to challenge myself, right? To always be learning. And to your point, in terms of engineering or energy or construction or insurance, even IoT, they're not things that you necessarily directly study in school or university or whatever. So so just getting exposure to that, thinking, hey, this would be a great opportunity to learn about these different industries, what makes them tick, what are the challenges, and again, like how can technology be applied in it.
Excellent. Love it. Always looking to learn. So now you face yourself a new problem when it comes to insurance. So let's talk a little bit about that landscape. What are some of the issues you initially saw, and then how were you looking to solve them?
Sure. Well, I know a lot of real estate owners and developers listen to your podcast. So when I think about insurance, I think about it in the context of the real estate industry. And when you think from that perspective, what's the number one thing people are trying to do? In my view, for an owner developer, it's around protecting project margin, right? And ultimately they go into these investments or these projects because they're looking to make a return, right? And the biggest thing that's driving that's kind of having an impact on those margins or presenting risk to those margins is just escalating costs. When you think about real estate, a big piece of that is construction costs. And then when you kind of start to dive in a little bit more about, well, what's driving a lot of the construction costs? A big part of it is insurance costs, which we talked about, and then things like rework, delays. There's a lot of things that can throw construction projects off track and off budget. And construction is a huge industry, 13% of global GDP. So it's a big area when you think about it. And when I think about the problem at Brickeye and the problem we're looking to solve, the big driver around those construction costs, if you look at it through a risk lens or an insurance lens, is water damage. So that area, up to 70% of builders' risk claims right now are coming from major water damage incidents during construction. So it's a major issue, and in terms of solving that problem and really ultimately using technology to do that can help protect margins at the end of the day.
Got it. And when it comes to these water issues that can occur, initially I just think of hurricanes, right? One of the big climate risks. Alongside that, are there any others that would draw attention to insurance?
A really good question. When you break down water damage a little bit more, it typically comes from two kind of types of water damage, or two drivers. One is what we call water escape. So that's when you've got a mechanical building system. You've got your domestic water. You've got HVAC systems that are carrying water, and you have some kind of pipe burst, a leak, and it causes damage in the construction site that way. And what's happening is we're seeing more of that. I think a big driver of that is kind of the demographic shift. So you're seeing a lot of folks, retiring out of the industry. With them goes a lot of experience, knowledge on how to do things right. And so, and you've got, new folks coming in, but sometimes those skills aren't being transferred. And so that lack of skilled labor to kind of do these things right and build it right, you run into more and more problems that risk develops, that you've got more of this water escape or damage that way. The other one is exactly, to your point around what we call nat cat exposure, natural catastrophe exposure. Just talked about climate earlier, as climate change evolved and you're getting more frequent and severe storms and weather events. The other type of water damage is water intrusion. So water coming into your job site as you're erecting your building. Your envelope's not closed yet. You're still exposed to the elements, and you're starting to put in, expensive finishes and electrical and all the things that go into a construction project. And when those storms come through or those, weather events happen, that can cause a lot of damage. So those are the two big areas that are driving things right now.
I see. Yeah, great knowledge for both, and also some of the changes that have happened, like you said, with less skilled labor or just different age group of labor as well. When you see those who are more experienced with some of the infrastructure and newer folks coming in that may not have that level of knowledge, could also have an effect. So, when you first started diving into the space, how were insurances coming up with solutions? Was it, looking at certain types of data sets? Were they less data driven? What were you seeing that you said, wow, like there needs to be a change here?
Yeah, great question. I mean, in many ways, and insurance people will tell you this as well. I can say it because I've heard it from them directly that, in a lot of ways, things haven't evolved too much on that end, and that when they think about risk and underwriting risk, with, putting an insurance policy in place, they're typically looking at what we call loss runs, or like what is the historical, events that have happened to a particular builder or owner developer. How often have they had claims? Have they had issues? Right. And so they're looking at your track record historically. And then they're looking at, what's your reputation like? Are you working with really reputable builders? Do you have really key management practices in place that are kind of best practice in the industry? Like, what kind of risk are you, right? Are you a good risk to insure? Or are you, maybe something that's a little riskier? And to a large extent, that's still primarily how these decisions are made around insurance. And so, there's a real opportunity for disruption because technology can really bring a lot more information to the fore around, hey, not only can we kind of mitigate these risks in real time using technology, and so then that's a win. That's a win for everybody involved, right? The insured is not, dealing with as many claims. The insurance companies are protecting their loss ratio as well. Projects get built on time, on budget. Everybody kind of wins when you can apply that. So in the absence of technology, what's happening is, and you see it today, is that just insurance costs are just escalating. They're going through the roof. So the solution, with the exception of some of the more progressive, builders, developers, insurance companies that are applying technology. In the absence of that, it's really just, hey, let's continue raising premiums and let's continue raising deductibles to the point where, you mentioned storms, and if you're building in areas in the United States, as an example, like Florida or Texas, where, there's it's not uncommon to see hurricanes come through and there's that nat cat exposure. Sometimes you're seeing water loss deductibles that are reaching like $1 million to start. So it's significant, and it's just not sustainable. So we need to find other ways to not just keep ratcheting up the insurance costs, because then we get less things built. It's more expensive. It's how do we actually tackle the root cause of these incidents and reduce the total cost of risk.
Exactly. Well said. And just a note for the viewers, for risk, there are multiple sides. So there's assessing risk, but also mitigating risk, like you mentioned as well. You can't ever get risk just to 0%, even if it's 99.999%. There's always that small chance.
Exactly. No, and that's a great point. And that's where technology can play a role. It's never going to be a perfect world. You're not going to be able to, catch every incident and prevent it from happening. There are ways you can use technology to understand what's happening in real time to say, hey, the conditions on the construction job site are such that, maybe it's quickly dropping below freezing, and maybe one of the heaters stopped working, and you've got a big sprinkler system that's been pressurized, and we could, pretty accurately predict, hey, you're dropping below zero or below freezing, and so you may have, pretty high probability of a pipe burst in a major incident. So we could identify those things up front. But you're right, on other issues, it's really hard to predict, what's going to happen. So the idea or the benefit around the technology is that we can use things like Internet of IoT sensors, Internet of Things sensors, automations to identify those issues sooner, like when they happen, and then being able to take action. So things like sending alerts to the people that need to know about it, but also things like automations where you can, for example, have a rule where you've got a valve that, shuts down. Hey, we identified an incident. We're going to shut that down. And now you're reducing the severity of the incident because you can respond to it sooner. What happens today is, if you don't have that kind of technology in place, more often than not, these things happen off hours on a construction site or over a long weekend. You're lucky if, maybe there's a security guard walking around and they happen to notice, hey, there's a lot of water on this floor. What's going on? If they find that, or by the time they find it, it sometimes it's never discovered. It's kind of the damage has reached its full potential. And at that point, it's kind of, well, it's done. You got to put an insurance claim in, and it can be multiple millions of dollars on these large projects. And, whereas the technology can identify it quicker, isolate it, at least, something that might have been a $5 or $10 million claim can be reduced to something pretty minimal, and they can kind of keep going where they left off.
That is super powerful. Being able to utilize technology, understand what risks are there, and be able to have alerts. So let's take a step back. For someone who's maybe, heard of Internet of Things, it has been around for a period of time, but isn't really sure how it all combines with real estate. I mean, you just gave a really good example right now as a use case, but could you give more of a high level one of what is Internet of Things, what are sensors, and how do they play a role?
Yeah, great question. So taking a step back, I mean, IoT or Internet of Things, basically you're talking about connected sensors, connected devices, right? Connected to the internet, right? And to the cloud. And so what it's enabling you to do is make those devices smart and to be able to communicate with them in both directions. So to be able to get kind of real time information on what's going on, and also be able to send data back to those devices and say, hey, you told me this, now do that, right? And be able to remotely control these things. So a lot of things can be IoT enabled, whether it's a sensor like that's detecting the presence of water in this case, or you have a flow meter on a pipe and it's telling you, hey, here's how much water is traveling through. But then even things like shut off valves or controls for a pump. I'm talking about examples in construction, but the simplest thing would be you could have IoT devices in your home, right? That like your doorbell, or your controlling your blinds, right? These are all examples of IoT. And to your point, there's different applications. And so what I find interesting about what we're doing is kind of bringing that technology to a job site, because construction's a whole new frontier, right? And it's considered really harsh environment, for lack of a better term, right? It's hard to deploy technology in a construction site. Things are constantly changing. Things get, bumped around. It's not the easiest place to kind of get any kind of connectivity to be able to talk to the cloud and have those things. When you think of the more traditional application of IoT, it's more in, and what your listeners might be more familiar with is kind of application smart building technology. It's, hey, now the building's completed, and now you're looking at the operation of the building, and it's a nice clean environment. There's Wi-Fi all the time. Everything, nothing's getting banged around, and it's pretty easy to, or easier to deploy technology in that kind of environment, right? The challenge that we've taken on is going upstream, saying, hey, we really need to understand what's going on in the construction site, and we want to mitigate risk there. So how can we deploy technology there? And there's a number of things that we have to account for that, we wouldn't in other kind of applications.
Of course, yeah, you're tackling such a difficult problem. And for me as a data geek, I think, how is this even possible? Because as a data person as myself, sometimes you need thousands of instances to train and to understand what the solution is, which I assume for construction sites, there's probably less of that type of data. So walk me through a little bit, maybe with a use case of a solution of maybe some of the initial difficulties, but how does your company able to overcome that and still have a great product that can help these sites?
Right. No, great question. I mean, it comes down to three components that we kind of deploy as more of a turnkey service. So the one is the ruggedized hardware. So being able again to put out sensors and IoT enabled devices that are going to withstand that construction environment. And so Brickeye, along with its partners, will go out and actually install those things in construction sites, make sure that it's done right, it's working. We kind of check the health of everything. The other key piece I mentioned is the connectivity. It's not kind of a trivial thing. As I mentioned, usually maybe if there's any connectivity on a job site, it's at the trailer. They've got some Wi-Fi or whatever, or it's Bluetooth. It's not really reliable. So you really need some kind of standalone connectivity that's going to work. So we use to geek out a little bit. We use 900 megahertz radio waves to talk, so the sensors talk to what we call a network link box, or it's kind of like a gateway. It's like your Wi-Fi router, but not Wi-Fi, right? It's using radio, and it's sending information to these network link boxes, and then the network link boxes. The radio is the radio is very reliable because it can bounce off concrete. It can get into places that a normal signal wouldn't be able to, right? And then when those signals reach that link box, it transmits the data up into the cloud through LTE, or the cellular network. So if you're Verizon, AT&T, wherever you are, and you're kind of whatever network is available, it's going to use that to transmit the data up to the cloud. And then the last piece, that's the connectivity. The last piece is the software. So you really, to integrate all these things together, you need to be able to visualize what's going on. So whether that's through a handheld app or a dashboard, just being able to understand in real time what's happening on my job site, what incidents should I be kind of aware of, be able to get alerts in real time if something's happening. And then you ask, how do we do that? We have a number of kind of algorithms and rules in the background to say, okay, we're collecting this data. We're monitoring these conditions in real time. And if, I'll give you an example. If we have, some abnormal flow rate, on a, we give a use case of what's called a temporary water run. So this is like a pretty kind of thrown together water line that's not permanent. It's used during construction just to kind of help the trades get water as they're putting up drywall and finishing suites and things like that. And then they get taken down. But because they're temporary, they're very prone to, either being left on, disconnecting, bursting, and in some of the freezing kind of locations as well. So being able to monitor that in real time, especially when it's off hours or on weekends, is an important use case. So we would have a rule set up, for example, to say, okay, before the construction team arrives to site for the day, let's open up a valve on that temporary water run. So we'll control that remotely. We'll open that up. If we see any abnormal flow before the site's even on the team, or before the team's even on the site, it means that someone's left something on, right? Someone's left a babe on something, and there could be damage happening. So right away we would shut that down, notify the team, so that when they do come to site and say, hey, by the way, someone's left something on, you need to go do a walk down, understand what's happening, so you can close that up and then open up the valve again and be able to actually get water and do your job. And then when you're done at the end of the day, being able to automatically shut that off. So you're not relying on someone to, remember, hey, I got to turn that off at the end of the day. You'd be surprised how kind of simple some of these things are, but it's a long weekend. Someone wants to get out, it's a Friday. Hey, let's go. And, hey, you forgot to turn the water off. So in a lot of cases, it's kind of peace of mind that, okay, the technology is taking care of managing that risk so that, the project team can focus on building the building and actually getting construction done.
Exactly. Not worrying about these maybe smaller tasks, but that could have detrimental effects if not taken. Yeah, let's dive a little bit deeper into the incident management piece. So, maybe if I was in the seat where I'm, contemplating using your company, I'm thinking, there could be a ton of issues that come up. How do I categorize which ones are higher level, lower level? And what help do you provide to identify these different types of risks?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually, it speaks to how we think about risk across the construction cycle, but also over the insurance policy. And so it's kind of a good segue into thinking about, okay, we can mitigate risk in real time during construction. But to your point, how do you identify what risks or exposures you might have, and what are you going to do about it? And when something happens, what is the response plan or that kind of thing? And so we actually, when we get involved early on, before shovels even in the ground. We get involved in the pre-construction stage to look at the project. We'll look at the drawings, we'll look at the construction schedule, and based on the mechanical design and the exposures of the building, we'll actually work with the client to put together what we call a project-specific IoT water mitigation plan. So that is outlining in detail, to your point, kind of what are the risks that are involved in this project on the drawing, kind of where's the technology going to be deployed, what, for how long, based on the construction schedule, what risks is it overlooking? And we work with the client to do that up front, because not only does that plan now kind of set the table to, how you're going to mitigate risk once you do start construction, but it also helps drive reductions in insurance costs up front. So what's evolving now is that when an owner developer or a general contractor goes to their broker to go get insurance or builder's risk insurance for their project, there's all kinds of documents and things that they hand over, right? Drawings, schedule, geotechnical reports, things like that, right? And so what's increasingly becoming kind of part of that submittal package for insurance are these technology plans. And to your point, the steps of insurance, like assessment, is a key piece. So how do you assess that risk? If you're outlining up front how you're thinking about these risks proactively, what technology are you using to address them, and that forms part of your package that it goes out to the insurance carriers. And now these underwriters and the risk engineers, they're looking at this project and saying, oh, wow, they're taking steps proactively. They put together this plan, and this is how they're going to mitigate these risks. And I feel like this is a better risk to insure than this other project that's not doing anything, right? And if I'm an insurance company, where am I going to place my capacity, right? Like where do I want to put my funding for insurance? And so what we're finding is by taking that step up front, it's helping to reduce deductibles, by up to 50%. It's really driving kind of a reduction in that insurance cost, but then also the total cost of risk during the construction process itself. So that's kind of how we think about it, and think about how to use that technology up front, mitigate it in real time during construction, and then maybe we can get into talking about things like job site data and how to make use of that after construction as well.
Excellent. I love that you're in each of these phases of the construction process, not just implementing the technology, but helping to derive insights, helping to plan how the technology should be used ahead of time. And yes, would love to dive into that second phase or third phase once the construction is complete.
Sure. So, I mean, what gets me excited about a lot of this is that, as I was mentioning before, construction's been a bit of a black box or a black hole. It's hard to kind of see what's been going on in there. And so once you start digitizing or connecting the job site, now you're starting to get really interesting data around what's going on in these mechanical systems and what's going on with your temperatures and what's going on with, different aspects of your job site, your concrete, that you're monitoring, things like that. And when you get that real time data and then you start accumulating that and you have historical data you can look back on, um, that's where it gets really interesting, where you can start to generate insights, right? In terms of how to better manage your risk going forward. So now you can understand things like, hey, we had these close calls that we were able to mitigate, but that's a risk. Like, what caused that originally? What could we do differently on the next project to kind of avoid that from happening again? So it starts to inform your best practices in terms of risk management. And then it also starts to kind of create, as I was saying, a historical record. It's not just kind of in the more traditional sense that insurance looks at kind of loss runs, like where are all the things that went wrong, you know what I mean? And your track record that way. But it's more about, hey, we actually took steps proactively. We identified these incidents. We shut them down. It's showing that you're actually performing this construction in a much better way, and it starts to kind of help strengthen your story around your risk profile as a builder, as an owner developer, as a GC, in terms of what you're doing. And that can go a long way, again, in terms of helping you improve your margins, your productivity, but also helping you reduce the total cost of risk, and that includes your insurance costs as well.
Huge. I mean, I'm blown away with the value that you're able to provide, how it's shaking up the insurance industry. And for someone who is thinking about plugging in Brickeye, what are the right steps? So you did mention, like, you come in early on into planning. How does someone reach out to you, and how do they know they're in the right phase to do so?
Being proactive around this stuff is important. So as you said, kind of getting involved early, um, doesn't just help you kind of plan these things out. It also helps you budget the technology in, because that can be one of the hurdles, is kind of thinking about this later on when you're partway through your construction and realize, hey, I really should use something here, but this wasn't included in my original budget. So getting proactive early on is important. So reaching out, I mean, either visiting our website, getting in touch with us. Usually when you're 3 or 4 months prior to actually binding or going out to go get your builder's risk insurance, that's the best time, because at that point in your project, you've got drawings that are progressed to a certain point where now we can start looking at the building systems and get a sense of what you're doing. You've got a rough construction schedule. We have a sense of your timing on things. And those are really the two inputs that we need early on to start developing that kind of plan. And so we'll do that up front, like you said. And so whether that's, you reaching out directly through our website, asking your broker about it. We often get a lot of brokers coming to us and say, hey, our client would love to talk with you to help them on their next project. Even we're developing relationships with a lot of the major insurance markets and the carriers, the MGAs or managing general agents. So they'll often, we're on a list to say, hey, if you're looking for this kind of technology, go talk to Brickeye. So it can come from various different areas in terms of how to get a hold of us, but that's the process. We get involved early. We have a discovery discussion, learn more about your project, and then get those pieces in place to put a plan together. And then you're all kind of set to go. Ideally, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, it'll drive some insurance savings up front. And then when you're ready to kind of start construction, you've got a plan in place, and we come out and kind of deploy and kind of off to the races after that.
Excellent. Thank you for laying that so clearly, Alex. And I do want to transition a bit to a small sector of our audience. These folks are aspiring entrepreneurs who may be learning about tech, wanting to implement tech in the future, and would love to hear from your perspective. What are some pieces of advice that you have for those who are aspiring entrepreneurs, and how do they find these problems in the real world that they can solve?
I think probably the biggest piece of advice is kind of persevering through, especially in the new space, where you're maybe applying technology in a new way, or even a business model that's different. It takes some time. It takes education. It takes awareness. Talking with a lot of folks to understand kind of what's going on, the pain points in the market, what's happening. And so a lot of the innovations that we've come forward with are based on conversations across the spectrum. So trying to understand, well, what are owner developers struggling with? What are GCs struggling with? How are brokers thinking about, risk and managing that in construction as an example? And then even talking with the market. So understanding from underwriters when they're seeing projects come to them, what are the things that they're struggling with? And so I would definitely encourage folks to um, talk to as many people as you can throughout that value chain and try to understand, what's driving things and where the pain points are, and then how you can, bring something novel to the table that's going to help address some of those things. And but it's not an easy road, and takes time to kind of build that up, and it's always a work in progress. So that would be a big piece of advice, is to stick with it and learn as much as you can.
Very well said. Build up your knowledge, network as well. And with that, Alex, how would folks reach out to you and follow the great work that your company is doing?
Yeah, best channels are, visit us online at brickeye.com. You can learn more about what we're doing there. Would love to chat, reach out. LinkedIn, we use that quite a bit in terms of posting content, things that might be helpful for owners or GCs to think about as they're navigating this space. And tuning into podcasts like this, and just learn, educating yourself, learning more about kind of what's going on in the market, and what solutions are available.
Thank you so much, Alex. We've learned a great deal, and we will continue to follow you and your company's journey.
Thank you so much. Really great to be on, and appreciate your time.